Morena, kia ora everybody, what's up? Welcome to Robett Live. Another day, another rolling, and I hope we are all A-OK in New Zealand. Hope life's great. Got music playing, studio rolling. Very happy with the setup. It's become pretty decent. Today we're going to catch up with someone very important. Lots of titles, but what he is a capitalist for good, and he's trying his best. John Holt, give a quick little update here. Executive Chairman and founder of All Things Considered, a trusted focus lens on the sustainability and ethics of the global clothing and fashion supply chain. Oh, it's going to be good. A serial founder and company director committed to growing high impact, high growth ventures that will better New Zealand. Fingers as many pies. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, John Holt. How are you, mate? I'll give you claps as well. Hold up. There you go. Get some claps.
Oh, thank you so much. Huge audience.
Awesome. Very excited. Very excited. Quick context. How do you? You're at a party. You're on your second Heineken. Some young bucks come up to you and they're like, "Hey, what's your name?" You're like, "John." Like, what do you do? How do you answer that question?
Well, it wouldn't occur because I don't drink anything in green bottles. But let's say it was as a panhead, I would say that I do my best, which is a bit of a dickhead response, but it's kind of because I just really enjoy being involved in a whole lot of things and sort of learning and growing from them as fast as I can. So, I mean, it is kind of true, but it leaves people a little bit confused as to how to continue the next part of the combo.
There was a billionaire that a friend of mine had was buddies with, and the first time he met him, he said, "Oh, what do you get up to?" And he's like, "Oh, better this, better that." No idea the dude's a billionaire. But then sometimes, I'm guessing it potentially could come across like you're trying to be a dick, even though you potentially aren't.
Yeah.
Question. I was looking through your LinkedIn, and you've had your fingers in many pies across many industries. Maybe we'll start. I guess I'm trying to maybe validate it for my future because I feel I'm going to be doing lots of have stuff as well. Have you ever felt you've had a real job, or have you always just kind of done your thing and enjoyed it? Like, just give me your headspace when it comes to what's made you able to go so wide and far down the pipeline in many different industries and verticals.
Yeah, I've definitely had real jobs. It's just that I wasn't overly good at them, especially the sort of oversight, sort of bossy piece. So I'd loved a job back in the day for a what was a fabulous company. And apologies to those that are in it now. That doesn't really exist now. It was Hewlett Packard, and I'm a historian by training. Right, I went to university and did a Bachelor of Arts degree in military history. And so I just love the history of the company, and then I started working for them, and it was one of those companies that actually, you read the books about Hewlett and Packard and how they started the Silicon Valley thing and the little garage, and actually the culture and the vibe of the company at that time was pretty much exactly as it was described. So it was a phenomenal experience and a real job, and I learned a lot. But I sort of got a title there quite early, and worked mostly from New Zealand, but I worked on a couple of global projects as well. I was a bit of an entrepreneur, which I love the concept of. So, yep, real jobs, but sort of entrepreneurial rather than sort of standard rank and file.
What do you think if it were in 20 years ago, I guess entrepreneurship wasn't as much of a thing as it is today. Do you think the future of entrepreneurship for a lot of these bigger corporates who want to create speed proactively have strategies and nice safe boxes to try and bring in more crazy thinking internally with some type of entrepreneurs? Like how do you think the headspace of HR and good leadership is going to go when it comes to all the great creativity that does exist, but there clearly is always the battles between, putting people in the box if they've got entrepreneurial tendencies. How do you think that's going to potentially shift in the next decade?
Well, I think it's going to shift majorly, because I think if you don't actually become sort of, way more creative and entrepreneurial in your thinking, you're just not going to exist as a big or a small organization, because, everything's flipped. It's a really cool time, I think. I mean, if you talk about branding, for example, there's a bunch of the sort of old guard and, creative agency land that I talk to who just truly believe that, there's no control for a company over a brand anymore. And it actually, just because digital is everywhere and you're so able to sort of interrogate everything, that the consumer owns what your brand looks like. And then that comes back to having to be super innovative and super fast moving, like, used to be the tag of a startup entrepreneur. But I think a lot of companies are realizing that's actually just going to have to be part of their DNA as well. So challenging, because it's a tough change to make, right?
That's an interesting one from a brand perspective, because even if you look at some of the different formats of how people are consuming content on, let's say, TikTok or tech, for example, is the way that I guess media was one-way street of like our voice. We're telling you what the message is. We're telling you what the brand is. Stuff you listen. We've got the speakerphone. And even if you look at this, the integration of technology, being able to do like remixes and reels and different collabs and whatever, it's become a two-way conversation with the community. And weirdly enough, the long tail and halo effect of a bunch of those great creative ideas builds the brand way better out of the control than they potentially even thought of, right? So it's an interesting point on the media side that it's basically gone from one-way street to two-way highway, which is kind of cool, right?
It's very cool, but to your point earlier, it just challenges thinking of a lot of folks who've been quite comfortable with a sort of a point and shoot mentality, especially around marketing. It's like, go and tell the market that this product is good because of these things. That's just not a brief that's very easy to fulfill anymore.
So we've had plenty parts of the journey now, but I know that like right now, actually, let's go here. The last 10, 15 years or so, you've been able to see a lot of New Zealand businesses potentially trying to go global, lots of local companies trying to hit the world. What is the biggest single hurdle that you've seen brands fail at that are local in New Zealand trying to go global in the last 15 years? What is the single overarching, what's the overarching thread that you've found that is stopping more Kiwi businesses win?
Yeah, so I boil it down to three things. The first is aspiration. So, I think we're talking and thinking big, but I don't actually think comparatively to the way, say, a Silicon Valley company or Silicon Valley founder thinks. We're actually not thinking that big and that bold. You talk to someone like Peter Beck, he's a really good yardstick on that in terms of, if you're going to build a company, why don't you try and build $1 billion company? Because the time and effort and the risk is going to be the same. I think the second thing is pace. We like to think of ourselves as edgy, but when you get out into the world and you've had, 11 years we've been doing Territory 3, which used to be known as Kiwi Landing Pad. And, the fast eat the slow, basically. And so that's often not about like big wins. It's just about learning fast. So it could be a lot of failures, but like many of them, learning, getting there and surviving to actually find one that actually works. And the third thing is culture. We talk about that C word a lot in everything, but very few people actually execute it. And that, I think, is the big hurdle, whether it's your board, whether it's like trying to replace yourself as the founder CEO, that affects scalability the most.
I would say I'm interested on the speed one, right? Because you think, because we're small, we're fast and nimble, but then a lot of it you're saying is potentially not the case, which gets you a bit bummed. The vision and aspiration, you're like, let's take on the world. And then I imagine a lot of it is, no, we'll just hang on to Pookie. She'll be sweet, mate. Like it feels like it feels tension, right? It doesn't feel like it's as aligned as it potentially could be.
Totally. And it's that, wanting to kind of live the vibe that is Kiwi, I think. Then there's a lot of great things about it, but it's all about, it's like the secret of good comedy, right? It's all about timing. And so when you live that sort of, if you go into a US market, in terms of globalizing, and you will have seen this a lot. I mean, if you're not all about the hustle and just driving down to your pitch, within 5 minutes of a meeting, people are a little bit off put. Like they'll enjoy talking to you about Lord of the Rings and the beautiful scenery and all that sort of thing. There's a time and a place for that, but you've got to get that sort of first comfort level that there's something to talk about. And I think we're challenged by thinking that way. And then, to your question, you've got to talk about what your aspiration is. And we're sort of like, I don't want to tell too many people I'm going to climb Everest. I think I'll just sort of do it and then maybe, tell a couple of people later.
I always think about if 1 million New Yorkers turned up in Auckland, I wonder how the hustle culture would actually change to get things. And they had obviously plugins to global markets. I wonder how bigger and faster businesses in New Zealand would actually get simply from the culture
Hospo would go down in a heartbeat, right? And imagine a New Yorker getting the average New Zealand service, asking for a different milk in their coffee or a hamburger without buns and being told, no, it's not on the menu. I mean, there'd be riots in the street. How many do you say we're coming down? 1,000? Yeah,
No, a
it would be
million.
millions. Geez, no, we couldn't handle that. It'd be a national disaster, mate. It's
So
that
how do you think?
brutal change in culture.
Yeah, so I want to talk on that. How do you think the culture changes with the headspace of business leaders that are wanting to try and go global? How does it's clearly something that's in the DNA of many, either not to want to be, I don't know if it's a segue into mini tall poppy thing or anything, but just, you're talking about Everest, but don't tell anyone, being bigger and aspirational. How do you feel that business leaders in New Zealand can make a culture shift to help more of these founders actually pop and blow up and actually try and go and do it to make, it's like, it's okay to be aspirational and bigger and, level up? Like, how this clearly isn't a, hey, you can be all you can be. Like, what do you feel needs to change for New Zealand leaders in 10, 20 years to actually have better alignment with those three problems that you see there, John?
So for me, it's about, and COVID has really, really just exposed this big time, in my opinion. It's about having those softer skills and actually truly having them. So I'm talking about things like humility, and I'm talking about things like agility, and we talk about them all the time. They've been verbalized and popularized by actually mostly kind of therapists, right? The Brene Browns and the Esther Perels. But that sort of humility and agility basically says, to your question, I'm a leader that accepts that I need to go in much smaller steps because I'm actually, I've got the humility to realize that it's all new rather than the traditional leadership, mold, which is it's actually a bad thing to show vulnerability around the fact that you don't know how this is going to play out. So instead of building this big strategy and vision for stuff, you go, let's just go in much smaller steps and see whether that works, and then go to the next step and then go to the next step. But just as importantly, let's actually not go to the next step because it's pretty clear that it's not working. And I think, that whole idea that you bring someone into your organization to lead it who's had this, multi-chapter experience as a CEO or a senior leader, and that's actually what you hire for. What experiences for most CEOs would have been relevant to COVID, right? A lot of companies lost 100% of their revenue. Best practice says you do a worst case scenario that, one day you lose 40% of your revenue, and this time you're facing so it's just not something that that you can do that historical sort of, yep, I know what to do. I did it in the 90s or whatever it is, and this is what we're going to do.
So it's an interesting segue into leadership through COVID. In the last 18 months in New Zealand, who do you think have been a couple of the standout leaders that have led the right way for their businesses that you've seen personally? And
I love the work of people like Rob Campbell at a governance level, just writing and embracing the change from the point of view that it's a massive change that's just going to kind of take us time to adapt. And he's been very revolutionary, I think, in a lot of opinion around leadership and governance for a long time. But the sorts of organisations obviously he's been involved in, they were seriously smashed by just the impact on customers and revenue for those businesses. But as well as just sort of adopting this, one step at a time, don't panic. And I think also the humanity side of things too, the wellness and mental health thing we talk about. There's a lot of leaders out there that, because of what I just talked about before, because there has been no playbook, have been seriously challenged about the fact that they don't have an instant answer. And so, I think there's a number of folks out there that, have sort of put some planks out in front, which just say, look, that's okay, number one, and number two, just take smaller steps and kind of trying to figure this out and be truly empathetic to your stakeholders in a way that you probably never have been before.
Do you think COVID's exposed more good leaders or it's exposed more bad leaders?
I just think it's tested really, when you have everybody, we all have peaks and troughs of stuff that we do around our skill sets and our core competencies. And I think there's probably a mix in terms of some people who've actually had a lot more ability to embrace the change and the uncertainty faster, that perhaps weren't sort of performing as well in the traditional context. But if you ask me whether it was a net situation, I think most leaders would tell you that it's probably the most significant challenge to them leading an organisation that they've ever had in their careers.
Do you think, how do you think business leadership will change within the next decade from the experience of COVID? Do you think it's going to get younger? Do you think it's going to get more tech, more braver? Like, what are the big shifts you think will happen in terms of the C-suite and a bunch of these? We'll go for these bigger corporates and the bigger ones into town.
Well, I think that was already happening in terms of that. I love the work that Mei Chen and her team are doing in the Super Diversity Institute. So I think it was already happening in terms of embracing the fact that you have to have more diverse leadership and more diverse voices and thoughts at the top table. And of course, that goes way beyond gender. That goes to people who really understand the context of, not just a national disaster, but a global disaster, and all the things that A, you have to respond to, and then B, you have to now bake in and plan into the new world in terms of imagining the next thing, because it will be a next thing, and how you handle that. So I think a lot of folks are thinking about that already. It's the first time I think we've had 5 generations of humans in the workforce at the same time. So, you've got really rapid shifts in consumerism that you've never had as well. So, these Generation Zs, I think they represent about 30% of the consumerism in the world today already, and they're headed towards 50. And that's sort of like the early 20s to late 20s category. So how, if you're, 50 plus years old, are you going to really understand that sort of consumer segment as they become a massive part of your audience or your customer base really quickly without actually having some of them at the table?
Good point. So right now, say for that next gen that's coming up, where do you think the biggest opportunity potentially commercially for New Zealand as a whole is right now in the next decade? At a macro, globally, where do you see the sweet spot that potentially New Zealand should be trying to go for?
Well, I definitely think it's in 2 things. It's weightless, so more tech and innovation, but I think we need to be really careful about benchmarking where we're at with that. We have these sayings, and they were kind of cool in their time, punching above our weight, or biggest tech sector export and so forth. I think there's a lot of work to do around that, and especially around productivity. And then the second piece is, more in the mainstream, I think, from volume to value. So,
explain that for me.
Well, you've got our agriculture sector and so forth exporting and have been exporting for years, but there's a reality, I think, that's finally coming to bear that we're never going to open a market to the point where, the headline was, we nailed China, and now they order pretty much all their milk products from us, or all their meat from us. So, because we just could never supply it. And so that change to actually stopping trying to achieve those sorts of goals and moving more to the, let's get the most value and the most yield out of the things that we can supply, I think is a shift again that was already happening, but I think it's just going to accelerate.
Do you get more hopeful or fearful for the future of New Zealand business with the leadership that we've seen so far in the last 18 months?
Well, I'm an eternal optimist. It's just wired into my DNA. So, of course we're going to get better, but it's really about like how quickly. And I think that's just about, embracing a lot of the concepts that we've seen in the startup world for a long time, talked about, but also being careful about some that just don't translate. I just don't get this agile thinking type stuff in corporates. I've probably just made a lot of enemies doing that, but I just don't get it. It just doesn't seem to me to be a natural sort of productivity gain.
Well, this seems like a perfect segue, John, into the anti-consultancy. At a top line, I have got to, I guess on the come up, I would see consultants, these big brands and stuff, and I would always not quite get it. And then I started meeting them and getting to know them, and I started to understand a little bit about it. But the idea of the, and coming through the media landscape, there was always this kind of talk about the anti-agency of, they're going slow cruise ship, we're going speed. It was very like, it was kind of agile thinking to do it differently, but actually on the executing. What does the anti-consultancy mean? What's the genesis? Why does there need to be an anti in your potential opinion? And at a macro, if you talk about consultancy in the big world of corporates, where's it potentially gone wrong and where should it potentially go for the better?
So I don't think the end result has necessarily gone wrong, but I just think it's become quite cumbersome. And back to what we were talking about before in terms of shorter steps, I think there's a lot of value being missed just in the near term. So, you know, when you're in a big company and you've got stakeholders, you're publicly listed, and, you know, there's a whole lot of compliance and regulatory stuff, you are constrained in terms of how fast you move, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't get perspective, you know, in the now about things that could move the needle that you know, already exist, and you kind of didn't realize how powerful they were. You were sort of underplaying them. And B, you know, they're delivered to you in a very concise short form. And so that to me is the sort of anti-consultancy concept. It's the you know, we would love to deliver, and I'm working on this concept with a young, very aspirational chap called Mitchell Winton Smith, and we're riffing on this idea that, you know, when you look at things like sustainability, you know, that's an absolute mind frick for most large companies. Very confusing. Compliance is coming in, and I think there's an opportunity just to use the power of, you know, people like Mitchell. You know, he's in that 20 to 30 category. Bring them together in sort of micro interviews rather than the traditional sort of large scale research surveys, and deliver like 10 slides in terms of insights where, you know, we've asked a whole bunch of people, maybe 100, what they think of a brand in terms of being an employee of it or a customer of it, and just dig in and increasingly use their own knowledge to just deliver like 10 slides in 60 days and just help people understand that, you know, they're either on track or off track, or there's a new thing. It doesn't mean that you replace the consultancy, and anti-consultancy actually me. I'm ADD. I don't really focus on things for terribly long. I like short, pithy stuff. And I think a lot of executives and boards are going that way too, right? I mean, there's only so many hours in the day and so many things increasingly that you have to focus on. It's just getting to that and really not wanting to build as a business in terms of an anti-consultancy, a sort of a track of like, oh, great, we've just opened up a niche there where we can help the client with another 50 hours or another 100 hours. I'd rather just deliver something valuable on a really tight scope in 60 days, walk away with a feedback that it like really got them thinking about one or two things, and then move on to the next one, and then maybe come back with a different scope. But, you know, not have a plan to go from 5 consultants in that organization and that customer to 50 and those sort of traditional sort of, you know, blow it up and add value to them. But
John, you're totally missing the point, mate. That's how they make the money, John. It's the more people in the hours, John.
Yeah, I know, but that's the volume to value thing, mate. It's like, you know, if you're actually delivering value in a small period of time to directors who can actually understand it on a slide, rather than waiting 5 years for a, you know, 500-page report about all the things they could do as a corporate, people will pay more and more for that for a very small number of people. Rather than trying to get a margin out of, you know, a very large number of people sort of, and it's that classic thing, you know, you built software products and stuff, the more, and I've never had this solved or talked about effectively by anybody that I respect as a software developer. You know, it's this anti-correlation between the more software developers you put on a project, the less productive and the less quality outcomes you actually get. It's a fascinating area. You know, it just doesn't correlate to put more in and get more out.
Or you could easily argue that if you're in a meeting with more than 9 people versus 3, I think we know who's potentially going to have more of an open dialogue, who's going to get further down the pathway, who's going to be able to succinctly, you know, curate the essence of what they're trying to do with potentially the best IP. I mean, you get to see it in the other organizations. Maybe, do you think because on consultancies, there's a lot of, you know, people who do, you know, one-man band consultancies or one-woman band consultancies, small different units. Do you think there's a ninja move on how these businesses could potentially be structured differently in terms of the remuneration to be able to generally have a bigger, faster, better business that's more valuable than the volume of, oh, cool, I pay you $100 an hour and I charge you out at $250, which is kind of feels like it's been the copy paste model for the last little while. Is there some thoughts in your head on how you feel that pricing potentially could change for a ninja move for, you know, consultancy 2.0?
Yeah, I totally think there are a number of ways you could do that. And, one of them's that value play where, if you're confident that you can just make a couple of hits and you've got a sort of trusted relationship with that client, putting some money at stake that, really is focused on actually delivering one of those hits. So, you pay me, 2 or 3x the normal rate, to your point of how things are built, based on getting what you want. I mean, the tricky thing about that is as I say, is really trust. And I think the other model I love, and I definitely want to put it into a business before I leave this earth, is where the price you deliver the product or service to the customer keeps going down, similar to a subscription service, but the driver for it going down is quality referrals of other people that have the problem. So,
so how would that manifest in the real world? Yeah, how would that?
So you pay me 10 grand a year, and I go, hey, we've got this sort of approach to pricing structure, which says if 2 of your referral prospects to me turn into customers, then your fee goes down to 9 grand. And so they basically potentially you get to the I think a really cool spin up of this, which lets and it speaks also to a quality product and lifetime value of customer, where they get down for that initial product or solution to almost zero. But the only way they would do that is by bringing you in a whole bunch of customers, which spins up and informs what other solutions you could provide for that first customer, even though they're getting the first component free, and then they roll on the second, and it's the same model. And if you're really delivering value, why wouldn't they? It's super easy in theory, and it's still a theory, for them to just continue to refer people and be just slightly more driven to that. Telling you how good and how pleased you are with the product or the service by having that sort of model, saving the money.
Well, it's referral, but a scaled system, scaling down over time. So instead of just like refer once, it's an ongoing piece, right? And then it keeps the relationship tighter as more of a partnership instead of a transaction, because you're going to have to maintain the quality of service over that time to keep that going back down, right? Interesting. It's kind of a cool idea. What type of business do you think that would be easiest right now to potentially try and integrate in? Some type of consultancy, I'm imagining, or software?
Well, I think a software subscription service, and I think you can always put gates on it in terms of because people buy a product or solution in software, and ultimately a lot of the time they're really only using a relatively small component of the features and functionality. It's just that you don't really understand what's the most valuable out of those features and functionality until you get people at scale. That first customer might just have been relatively random in terms of wanting function X. So yeah, I think that would be the natural place to trial something like that, because you'd use that data and that scale and getting there faster through a referral program, because it's kind of you've got a cost of getting the word out there as well, so it's going to save you money on the demand generation stuff. But you're also going to see where the real sort of affinity to the functions and stuff, and that's one of the challenging things about software is, one big customer sends you on a sort of a tangent that's actually not that useful to anybody else, and you've only got limited dev resources, and you want that customer, so you go and deliver that, and then suddenly you realize just basically gone from configurable to customized.
Yeah. I like it how it goes from long tail to short tail to long tail, because they'll be having to, the quality of interactions and relationships will take it definitely from more transactions to partnerships. And I think that over the longer time, and you're right, if they're just getting that first component, by the time it circles back around to all those others, there's going to be that second one. And so it almost creates its own like mini growth loop of value, and not so much a pipeline and funnel as such, which just sort of, the word funnels always just kind of piss me off, as it feels like they come in and they go out. Well, in the real world, it doesn't work like that, because, and then they come back again. You'd have new products, new services, new jobs. Everyone has new titles. I think going to more to the circular economy, not necessarily just with sustainability, which is a great potential segue into this next bit, but actually more just about thinking. It pisses me off when people are so transactional with business relationships, not realizing that in 5, 10, 20, 15, I mean, you've been around the block a few times. I can pretty much guarantee you that 100% of your Rolodex you've crossed paths with in a different potential role or organization or something 10, 20, 30, even 30 years ago. So I want to get into all things considered. What is it, and why should everyone care? And I mean, I know, but they may not know, but you can tell me.
Yeah, no, thanks for the segue and the opportunity to pitch. So all things considered, my co-founder Andrea van der Meel and I are on a mission to shine a lens on the sustainability or not of the fashion industry. So, quick education, fashion industry, second largest contributor of significance to landfill through essentially, fast fashion, clothing, textile waste. And basically more emissions if you're going to go down that sort of carbon track than the aviation sector, which just fascinated me when I found that out as where's a problem to solve. So what we're doing is, people are getting really confused. There's this market for, how you used to have awards, right? So you win this award for, best bank, and it's a banking awards brand and all these sorts of things. Well, kind of fashion has gone that way around sustainability. So it's sort of like the back of a cereal packet. You look at a company's website, an Adidas or an H&M or what have you, and you'll see a whole lot of certifications and industry organizations they've joined up with, or you'll see some initiatives that they've built internally, or you'll see some tools that they're using that sort of validate the fact that they are having, big hits on these key sustainability issues. And sustainability, might be obvious, but I found that it isn't as obvious as I thought it was. It's not just about the sort of, the environmental stuff. A lot of it's about the societal stuff as well. So what All Things Considered's doing is basically taking, what's presented by one of these brands on their own website, usually on a sustainability page, putting it on our platform in one place, and doing the same for all these certifications and so forth, which they, say they are members of. And just helping consumers just weed through that to get, an ultimate answer around, do I feel that this brand that I buy clothes from currently is a sustainable brand? Is it authentic? Is it on track to, trying to reduce some of the largesse and the really negative contributors that fashion has had to the environment and society?
It's a chunky market. You said the word fast fashion. That's what I've just actually written down there before. For those that aren't aware exactly what fast fashion is, can you please give a quick 101? Because I think everyone has probably done it and they've potentially not realized it, and they think it's rad and cheap because again, this t-shirt for whatever, but they may need 100 of them, which kind of stuffs them up. But yeah, fast fashion in a nutshell. Give us the 101.
Yeah, so it's kind of the antithesis of you, mate, because I remember actually that was one of your things, right? Your black t-shirt and just wear it over and over. But for a lot of people, it's getting a set of clothing for a particular event or very small period of time, and rather than sort of putting that in the wardrobe to wear next season or next time, it's just actually a conscious decision that you're buying it as cheap, and you're essentially going to throw it away. After one or two wears, right? You're just not going to, because that's the way they've targeted you to get, that continued repeated sort of customer engagement. And it's usually shit quality.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Not that I'm going to go on a million different fashion tangents, but I was very fortunate, I guess, in my headspace of how I think about clothing, where for my life I was a professional snowboarder, and basically since as soon as I left high school, I would get paid to wear brand. I would get paid to wear the latest cool shit, rocket, cool, sweet logo. The day I stopped riding professionally, I gave all my stuff away, and then I couldn't. It was a mental thing that I was like, wait a second, why am I going to pay flipping $60 for that t-shirt to wear their logo on my shit? Stuff them. They should pay, because I guess in my headspace they had to pay it. So I just was rocking just blanks. But then I was just I still to this day wear blanks every single day. But then I started thinking about, well, what's the quality of these blanks? And so weirdly enough, when it comes to this, for years I've actually been trying to figure out, okay, what's going to last ages that I can just rock? And it's obviously, I found a good cheap one to do it. But then it comes on the other side where it's like, oh, if it's cheap, it's not sustainable, this, and 100% organic and this. And then you get the battle on the other side. So I'm like, shit, how do I meet in the middle here? And I'm interested on the fast fashion side, because if you think of like especially in America, the consumerism of how it's so dispensable for these things, it blows my flipping mind, man. Because I'm like, man, you could wear that shit forever, but they don't, and they buy cheap, and then they end up spending more. Like when I got married, I need a pair of dress shoes. I'm like, dude, I'm just gonna get some baller things. I bought one pair of epic dress shoes and I've had them for the last 10 years and it's been flipping sweet because they're solid, epic quality. And then simultaneously I've had a couple, cheap shirts, and next thing you know, you fast forward a couple of years, you've kind of gone through 5 or 6 shirts when you could have just had one real epic, Crane Brothers, properly curated, whatever what it is. So how do you think maybe attacking that, how do you think you attack this? Is it from brand down at the top? Is it culture at the bottom? Because I think now when it comes to, if you even just look at technology and social media and Instagram, or whatever, this consumption of what's hottest and latest, this refresh mode is now again directly correlated because you've got content integrating with commerce in real time, which I'm finding very interesting watching as it comes out. How do you see the future of, I guess, content and commerce as it starts to weave with the battle on top of, sustainability and trying to do the right thing? Because that feels like the battle is going to get harder.
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, with that narration. There's just a number of aspects to it. So starting at the top, I don't think anyone achieves 100% sustainability, and that's talking as a consumer, as a human, as a fashion brand. But I think the key thing is the authenticity of the story and the strategy that you're going to take. Like, for example, my play as a brand on sustainability is to make timeless, high quality items that would sit in someone's wardrobe quite comfortably for years, and make them expensive, because good stuff is expensive to make, but make them timeless. And so that's just a signature jacket, or something that you will, you might store it away at winter or bring it out in summer, whatever it is, but and that's sustainable. So that's not the sort of level I'll go to next, which is the what's it made of, and is it where's it come from, and is it sort of natural fibers, or is it synthetic? That's you've kept it out of landfill, which is one of our great problems. You've embraced the concept of just basically that they say actually one of the solutions to the vehicle emissions and all the largesse of that is actually just to hold on to the car you currently have literally until it rusts out and falls to pieces. Like, that would actually be the most impactful way to arguably to hit the whole sort of emissions from vehicles scenario, because it would cut out the new car market. What we have now is, sure, we have a lot of new EVs, but if you look at the supply chain around these, and this is very relevant for the fashion industry, that is where a lot of the environmental and societal damage comes. And fashion is a classic one for that. You've got coming back to your question, this other approach, which is, I will still provide you with a low cost item, but it is highly recyclable. So, it's not going to last as long, but there's actually a process and a system underneath it where you can see as a consumer where it's going to end up and what it's going to end up as part of that full sort of circular approach.
Do you see, so there's obviously two battles within obviously sustainability and, recycling and use of it and price. Let's jump into some tech stuff. You know this shit pretty well. How critical do you think the technology of blockchain will be in the sustainability future for fashion? Do you think
really
about?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think about it a lot, because basically what we want to do with All Things Considered is create ancestry.com for any brand. So, a lot of brands don't even understand, and it's often just impossible to understand how to get right back to the cotton field where that t-shirt was grown, because there's aggregators and there's wholesalers and there's things in the middle, and you previously really haven't had any core reason to think about that. So blockchain, I guess, was naturally seen as something that would just nail that problem. But talking to a few of the the more advanced folks in the fashion industry that have investigated and actually tracked literally back to there's a company called Little Yellow Bird in Wellington, they've literally got a tag on some of their items that you can tell you which rain-fed cotton field it was, the cotton was grown in, which is just rad in terms of supply chain transparency. But a lot of that tech was not actually ended up being blockchain, because it didn't really provide anything extra. The challenge was just how do you integrate the systems from the different providers when you think about what components does a jacket actually have in it when you put it on your person after you bought it from the shop. If you go right back to the creation of the nylon zips and the fabric itself, it's huge. It's a huge supply chain. So 1 in 9 humans in the world is employed in the fashion industry supply chain. That's how big it is.
Huh. Yeah, I'm wondering as brands try to differentiate themselves, how they tell that. I mean, it's all storytelling, right? But how they tell that story and that narrative of their authenticity within it, right? Here you go. Someone just says LinkedIn user. Don't know why this isn't saying who it is, but whoever it is, bloody thank you. Block Text is leading the way. Graham Ross is your man. All right, we can check that out.
Yeah, cool.
How do you? Yeah, I get really intrigued with a solution like that, because I think about, brand storytelling with it. There's going to be, and obviously maybe on the other side of it, instead of blockchain at the front for the story, is then after it's done, potentially this whole upcycling type scenario. I've seen a couple of cool people on Instagram and stuff be able to, there's two things I've seen in the fashion side for it post. There's this kind of retail arbitrage from Salvation Army to Trade Me. That's that. And there's another one of basically design skill sets, taking materials and bringing it into something else, sort of custom one-off pieces. Like, how do you think for, like, obviously there's things we can do at the front, this upcycling, what to potentially do with it, this recycling opportunities of what could be done with fast fashion after. Is there some practical, tactical ways you think people could potentially try and address the end of life of existing fast fashion, to think about something a bit differently? Are there brands? Is there opportunities? Is there, like, where's your headspace when it comes to that?
Yeah, so I've executed on that as well, rather than just throwing stones at it. So I'm very proudly the chair of a charitable trust in Porirua, just out of Wellington here, called Free For All. So it's freeforall.co.nz. And we basically intersect op shops, deceased estates, university halls, when they have, disposable items they only use for one season, one performance year or education year. And we put them in a big shop, which we've just increased. It's now 5 times the size of the last one. $5 entry fee. You can go in. We have commercial scales at the end of the process. You can take as many books, games, toys, clothes, some electrical items that have all been tested, and walk out with them, weigh them, and we thank you for contributing to our core mission, which at Free For All is waste minimisation. But in actual fact, your question, every day out there, we divert about 1,000 kilograms of mostly clothing and textile away from landfill. But the cool byproduct, it's still a waste minimisation play, is we give it to people who makes you, brings tears to your eyes. I was out there the other day with a few folks, just showing them through, and you've got a little kid, who's found some teacups, plastic teacups, putting them in a shopping bag, doing shopping. Like, I'm sure she would probably just not have the financial capacity, or her parents wouldn't have the capacity to go and do that at Toy World, and having a great time. $5. And so, I think, and to your question, that's how you really intersect stuff. So we call that a franchise for good. So we're quite happy, and we built a Putty, one of the companies that I chair, and I've been involved as a sort of shareholder and director for many years. We built the website for them, so it's sort of national website. You can basically exchange for free. So I think there's a lot of those quite simple community-oriented ways that can really start that diversion process, and also just have a huge amount of good in doing it, by just giving the stuff to people who need it.
So the franchise for good, I love the concept. How does Free For All scale? How can it scale? Because I'm sure you're obviously, if you're at the intersection of all this other stuff, you've got a conduit, and there's kind of a magnet attraction for, I guess, product. What's the thinking of where you'd like this to potentially go? Because imagine if it's a blueprint, this feels like would be pretty kind of easy to, yeah.
You would think, wouldn't you? But it's tough, because I think we're just in the early stages of people understanding the correlation between the problem and impactful solutions. And the gap, to your question, is people. I mean, basically, if you're listening to this and you have a group around you that has access to a space, a warehouse or a retail shop that, you can get for cheap or no rent or what have you. Some people who, all our people at Free For All are volunteers. We have a van which goes and picks up stuff, and we try and make a revenue stream out of that. And yeah, you need some marketing collateral. We have all that documented, so we can give you the brand and everything else. But it's been tough to get people to give it a go in their area. We've had a lot of inquiries, but a lot of folks are sort of seeing it as a cheap way to get access to only the best stuff, and then put it on Trade Me, and and we're quite happy with that sort of collateral risk, I guess. because ultimately, as long as it doesn't end up in landfill, we don't really care. That's our core mission. But yeah, I think we're just in our infancy of, to me, I mean, I'm biased obviously, but it's just a no-brainer solution for a community group or someone to replicate in their own location. And there are similar sort of concepts that people are doing, but to your point, you don't get scale if everyone's just sort of individually building these things. You could have much more impact much faster if it was a little bit more leveraged.
Does it feel, two questions? One, do the businesses like the Salvation Army and other hospices and stuff, do they see you as competition? And then two, in terms of scalability, instead of dealing with individuals, couldn't this plug directly in with like local councils and towns and stuff? How's those conversations sort of gone?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, this comes back to how many hours there are in the day. And Dee, our founder, I mean, she works incredibly. Dee stalked me on LinkedIn, and I have a rule in life: I'll meet anybody once. And we had a meeting, and she took me to her house, and what she was doing free for all on her front lawn. And to Jason, her husband's, he said, he was fine with it, but their entire double garage was floor to ceiling with stuff that she had gone to op shops. Because op shops run much more of a retail model. It's a per item cost. They've got so much shelf space, and sometimes when seasons change or stuff just isn't selling, they've got to get rid of it, and they've got to put it out the back. And what a lot of them do is they put it out the back and they put it in a skip, or they put it in something that just comes and picks it up and puts it in a landfill. So Dee, I was really attracted to Dee as someone to really help. Because she was going into those discarded items from a lot of op shops and saying, hey, 95% of the stuff's actually okay, and we can actually put it in there. And so that's why we just have an enormous amount of space. If you're ever down here, when you're back in NZ, I welcome you to come out and see it. I mean, people hear me talk about it, but when they see these towers of banana boxes of clothing and items that we have, we could have way more people we could be helping coming in the door if we actually got the word out a little bit wider and faster. But it's tough because there's so many things to do.
That's the thing, is trying to get the priorities of your time. So on that, maybe before we go, I'm interested to ask about on the investing front. If you're a young investor, a young founder now, and you're into the ecosystem, you've obviously been around the block a couple of times, and you've seen pretty much most things, I'd imagine. How would you? What advice? At least twice, definitely twice. I've gone half a block. I've stopped for a steak and cheese pie on the corner of the second thing. But how do you? How would you structure, or how would you prioritize a young person's time now? If they were if they're a founder in New Zealand right now, like how would you think about their time and allocation, prioritization of what truly is important for a founder trying to get either investment and grow their business in 2020? What are we at? 21 now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I would prioritize it around probably less about building early, more about showing a true understanding of two things. One, a true grasp of the problem you're solving, and being able to articulate that in a really compelling way to anybody, really. I mean, obviously investors and potential employees and so forth, but getting people on board to just let you spend more time with them is all about showing them either they can make a ton of money out of it, or it's something impactful that they're interested in learning more about. So that would be the first thing. And then really educating yourself, and even just showing that is the skill you're demonstrating, about how you would have the capacity, not necessarily to take that idea to the full scale, IPO business exit, but how you have the capacity to understand, because good investors have been around the block a long time. They know, when you say it's going to take 3 years and we'll make 50 mil, that it's more like 10 years and you might make 15. But what they want to increasingly invest in is people who are self-aware, to your question at that early stage, who don't come, saying they've got all the answers, but show a growth mindset and show that they've already done the research about the challenges they'll face, and they've got some really well thought through ideas, and where the time comes in, about how to address those. There'll almost certainly be different approaches, but it just shows that you know what you're up for. I always say venture is adventure. Just the A and the D fell off, quite a while ago, in some book.
Yeah, it's good advice, because a lot of the time with, I'm 36 now. The you don't want to take away the energy and the passion that's in them, but then there's this other layer of commercial sensibilities and realities where every potential projected P&L is in the third year hockey stick, and you're like, yeah, okay. But I think maybe the one on top of it is a self-awareness piece of realizing that realistically, even though the nuts and bolts of the details are clearly not lowered out, and maybe you've got some naivety to those things, is that they're back in the jockey, not the horse. That's like, do I like you? Do I trust you? Do you get it? Do I know you get it? Will you be willing to learn? Do you have that growth mindset? Will you be willing to listen? Are you confident enough, but not too much of an asshole that you'll tell everyone to piss off and just do your own stubborn thing, even though you don't know what you're doing? Like it's very much, it feels doubling down even more so the same way you're potentially talking about, income versus impact. It's kind of going from those hard skills to more of the softer ones to still have that vision and stuff, but being able to really sort of curate to, maybe we can just call them better humans. Maybe just more better humans are getting more money. Maybe that's the lesson.
I reckon, I mean, I think if you, take the historian's view of it, a lot of these organizations that don't even know, didn't really sort of embrace the concept of sustainability, but just built what they thought was a really human-centered, purposeful business, sometimes starting 50, 100 years ago. They actually show all the attributes that now all these other companies are trying to grab and, immediately latch onto because of compliance or consumer demand and stuff. So it's absolutely agree with you in terms of that mindset and that whole, people-centric and self-awareness piece that I think is just increasingly critical, not just for, the young founders starting up, but that's the reflection a lot of our top-end leaders have to have as well.
Well, it's definitely trickier to, when you're young alpha male, specifically when you're like on that you've got that like rah flipping just ante up, being able to have, I think you see it, like I was definitely that when I was in early 20s, and, I'm trying to slowly mature like some hopefully good wine, but I can still feel that energy when you see that young buck, and it's so rad because it reminds you exactly how you were thinking, but at the same time you're like, oh, you've got a long way to go. And that's why it's kind of cool when you can go for more the EQ than the potential IQ. You can hire smart people, but being able to have those, I think the other one thing as well is having the tough crew around who can have those harder sort of chats. I'm sure you've had to have many of them in the past with those type of things, and it probably becomes a lot easier if they're more got a bit of a growth mindset and not so blocked and walled off to actually listen, right? Especially even though they may not, the mentors may not have been there before, but wanting to know, how to potentially do it the right way.
Yeah, I agree, and probably second only to the alpha female. Because frankly, in terms of high potential, I'd if I had two equally, high potential alpha male, alpha female, I'd back the female just because. I just think the tenacity and the resilience. Putting aside the whole gender equality thing, I just think that it feels to me like there's just more determination. Assuming they've, got to the same level of showing those sort of skills and growth mindset stuff we talked about. And that's a big topic, obviously, but this is a wacky world. 80% of the decisions in consumerism are made by a female at the end of the day in terms of whether to pull the trigger and swipe the card or pay the money. And yet we just have this, ridiculous sort of imbalance about who leads these different organisations. Again, putting aside the gender equality thing, I just think it's a ridiculous situation because of that market stat.
Well, even the on the VC side, I think it was at like 3, or it was definitely under 5% of female founders actually get the VC funding that sort of come out too. And it's interesting that because data has proven that it's actually better returns and investments of it. And exactly to your point, if the majority of the decision-making dollars are going to that, there's a very clear disconnect between that. And it's ironic coming from an older white dude named John to be saying that, because literally the most popular name that they were saying, there's more CEOs named John than there are females. And it's like, and it sucks. It's like kind of Rob in some ways as well. Like he'll say stuff and it's like, man, for someone that looks like that, rolls like that, he should not be saying that, but he just does. And it's so good. Like,
well, we have a support group for Johns now. I mean, it's a real problem, and we're doing okay. But yeah, we get smashed in that male pale stale stereotype.
Well, you got
Tom or someone.
Nah. Karen got taken and John got taken. Karen and John got
What's the male equivalent of Karen? How can you be a male Karen? I'm fascinated by that.
Oh, I'm sure one of the listeners and viewers will jump in, and it's kind of always awkward too. Like I was on a call recently with someone else named Karen. You just wonder, like, because in the time of culture we're in, how much unnecessary shit she has to deal with just because like it's kind of unfair. But so, I guess someone's going to take your name.
Yeah, isn't it radical? I mean, but isn't it radical how that's bedded in for the Karens in the world? You know, most of them.
CEO John as well. I've
CEO John's.
CEO Johns, and no, I definitely get it. If people want to find out more about the free for all, franchise for good, like where can they go and what can they do? Because it seems like a pretty interesting model that's clearly doing some good stuff. Plug away there.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. So if you're in the Wellington region, you can actually come and see us. Or in fact, we have people coming from all over the lower North Island. But the store is in Porirua, and you can get the address. It's in Outie Street, but you can get the address at freeforall.co.nz, and it's open 7 days a week from 10 till about 4 o'clock. And it's a great place to go thrifting or op shopping if you're into that mode, and also a great place to just basically help us out by stopping the stuff going to landfill.
And all things considered, where can they go to for that?
Yeah, so we'd love your audience's help on that. We're in beta, so we're just really riffing on whether we're getting things right, and we're alltc.co, and actually on that page you can see a couple of letters from us about our vision and what we want to do. So we're always open to feedback on whether that's on the right track. But you can also sign up for the beta, which is live now, and actually experience it. We've got about 150 companies on the beta, and ironically, we've got about 120 certifications and associations already just linked to 150 companies. So even getting to that stage has shown you what a consumer problem it is. Almost as many claims and certifications and initiatives and innovations as there are actually companies on the beta.
Interesting. Yeah, very cool. Well, look, I really appreciate your time, John. I know we've been crossing paths many years, and it's funny we haven't actually probably brought down in person, but obviously we've got a couple of good mutual friends who are more than enough trouble, which is a conversation for offline. And when I'm back in Wellies, I'd love to be able to catch up in Lincoln, but definitely appreciate your time.
Yeah, cool, mate. I've enjoyed it. Thanks very much for having me.
Legend. I'll give you some claps to leave. There you go.
Oh, awesome.
Get some claps. There you go. Fine. Shot, brother. Cheers, man. Yeah. Oh, wait, where's the claps? Oh, I stuffed the claps. Where was it? Oh, there we go. There were the claps. Appreciate it, team. All right. Adios. Have a good day. Big thanks to John for coming through. Good banter. Bloody great banter. And I'll be talking to you all soon. Adios, team.